Hello, Process Art Discovery audience. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to be talking about the Meiliang watercolor set that I received from Paul Rubens. 48 colors, student grade. We're going to test them out on a little vignette to see how they perform. Before we start painting, I'm going to show you a little bit about how I prepare the surface that I want to paint on. And today we're going to be using the 100% cotton paper that came in the travel set from Paul Rubens, and the Meiliang watercolor paints as well. And because these are loose little sheets, I will be taping them onto a piece of core plast. And so to do that, I just wanted to give you a quick idea of what that process is all about. So I want to give a bit of room for some tape around the sides, and I will put my little ruler about there. This is core plast, and it is, I don't know if you can see the lines, but it is plastic with corrugated center. So I'm just going to give enough room for the, and then I'm cutting crooked, for the paper to sit. I don't know why I'm not, because I'm not standing over the top of it, I suppose, that I wasn't cutting that straight. But it's easy to cut. Get my knife in there and just slide it right down. And now I have a piece of backing that's easier for me to handle with my paper. And then I will tape it down. Debated about using the black core plast or the white. I couldn't find the black, and then we decided that the white actually would give a better contrast to the edges. So here we are with the white core plast. As I said, it is available in black, so that's an option. And we'll just tape down the edge. Another thing that I love about the core plast is that because those lines are there, and I can line up my page with one of the lines, and then hopefully it stays still. And then I can line my tape up with another one of the lines, and it will allow me to keep a nice straight border, a nice even border. And that's great for these sides. On the top and bottom, maybe not so easy, but yeah. And it's not necessary to tape your work all the way around the edges. It's these are square pieces. The pages are 7.5 by 7.5 inches. I'm going to tape each side because I would like to see a bit of an even border. I may at some point decide to put this on a cradle board where I would want a nice straight edge. And cradle boards here in BC anyway come in even numbers. So they're 4x4s, 6x6, 8x8s, 10x10, 8x12s, that kind of thing. And so you just want to be conscious of not undersizing the piece of paper that you want to use. So because this is, pardon me, 7.5 inches by 7.5 inches, if I decide to move forward and use a 6x6 cradle board to glue it onto, or have a mat cut, the actual painting will be 6 3/4 inches, the way I've taped it off there. So 6 3/4 inches. These aren't conducive to standard mats that we can purchase here anyway. You may be able to order some matte, photo mat products online, and I'll research that and put a link if there is an option that would give you an opening we'll see where, where this goes. We may have to mount it on a cradle board or cut it down. They're great to cut down even for a 5x7 framework, or frame rather. So a few options for those who like to work small. I think they're great, good size, and the testing that I had done previously showed me that the paper is decent quality. It wasn't buckling much. So we'll see what happens when we put some splotches of water and add some color. So the tape that I've used here is the Solo tape, available from Watercolor Online. I'll put a link in the description as well. I love the black. Comes in 2 different sizes, and I use it for resists for my birch trees, and we might do another one of those using these new paints as well in the future. But the best tape that I found, and it's safe to leave on your work for up to 12 days, which is important for me because often I get called away from my studio and don't get a chance to complete a project for a couple of days, and I'll come back and complete it and be ready to take the tape off, and it's just lovely. It comes off very nicely. So we'll also interesting to see today how the tape does come off of the surface. I don't burnish it down. It's there. It's stuck. It's doesn't need to be burnished down, and I don't mind if at any point a little bit of paint seeps under the edges. It's watercolor. That's the beauty of it. I think the inherent nature of water is to flow, and if that happens a little bit under the edge of the tape, I'm okay with that. All right. So these paints came in this metal container. There we go. Full of all kinds of great mixing wells and places to work. A bit awkward for my space here at the moment, so I'm just going to set that aside and use the paints like this. When I tested the set out earlier, I found that some of them were a bit longer to wake up than others. I don't want to spray the whole thing because they'll mush together because they're so closely spaced. So we'll take our time wetting each one, and that will, in the past I just often will just wing it. I wet my whole palette, and everything's ready. This time I'm going to give it a little bit of forethought to what I want my vignette to look like in terms of a color scheme. So, I think for good comparison, I'm going to stick with colors similar to what I normally use for this one, just so I can sense if there's any difference or how much of a difference there is. So typically, splashing water everywhere here. Typically I use blues and greens and maybe some oranges and some quinacridones. They don't have quinacridone colors listed here. There are some that move in similar ways, which is great. Their deepest blue is the Ultramarine, and that's going to be, drip some water on there. There's Ultramarine, there's Prussian Blue, which is a bit of a brighter blue than I normally would use. And this is where I think the this paint mixing, I wish it was just a bit smaller for demonstration purposes, but I'm going to use that. It's probably too shiny. To see if I can mix some paints. Yeah, it's one of the reasons I don't care to use a metal palette is because the paint just beads up. It's not going to allow the mixing the way I'd like to see it. So I'm going to skip that. It was a good idea, just not good enough. All right, so I've woken my Ultramarine, my Cobalt. I'll put a couple drops in there. The colors that they call Fresh Blue and Sky Blue are more of a, almost like a fallow bluey green, a little bit brighter, but I think they might move kind of interestingly. So if I was to go to those, I would want to add brighter colors as well. So if we're going to stick to the earthy tones, I'm going to stick to ultramarine, a bit of cobalt perhaps. I'll go into the siennas, the yellow sienna, the regular sienna, and yellow ochres, and then some greens. The siennas mixed with the ultramarine will give me some nice grays as we move along. And then we'll throw in maybe a couple of the other brighter colors for some highlights. So I'm going to just wake up a couple of the greens and the siennas here. As I say, I don't want to spray the whole palette. So we'll just give every one of these just a little bit of a drink to get started. And as you know, I do love my purple, so we'll just in case we're going to use them, we'll start to wake them up a little bit. These are the three purples here. There's one they call deep violet, there's fresh purple, and there's violet red. So we'll get them woken up a bit. This is called tree green. I guess if we're going to make some trees, we should probably have a bit of tree green in there. The hooker's green, for me, is a bit on the bluey side, but we might want to try a bit of that as well. And then the olive green, which gives me my beautiful earthy tones that I like to see in my landscapes. All right, we are ready. Trusty spatter bottle. You can pick these up pretty much anywhere, dollar stores, that kind of thing. What I like to see in a bottle, spatter bottle, is that it does come out in, if you just squeeze the trigger just ever so gently, it comes out, you can probably, there, if you can see the spatter on the black, if it shows up shiny, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those splotchy, spattery drops for the pigment to settle into and have some fun with. That's as opposed to the mister spray bottle. This is sold online as a facial mister, as a plant mister. Lovely option. I just, you know, especially if you're painting large areas and you don't want to do the brush work, and it is, let me just move that so I don't get it wet. It's just a fine, constant mist. If we were to use this misting bottle today on our vignette, we wouldn't have a vignette effect, the effect that I'm looking for. All the paints, all the colors would just kind of mingle and diffuse because the paints follow the water, right? So we'll set that aside for now. We don't need that. In the past, I've suggested you, if you're at a loss, pardon me, for a design idea, because I don't paint from reference, I often will just spatter in a random letter formation or number formation. So an L and M we've done in the past. We've done C's and B's. And sometimes just across is fine as well. Keeping in mind rule of thirds, you don't want something dead center. You want your horizon lines to be, you know, more top third, bottom third if you can, or lower than center. And then you can add variations as we go along. So I think for this one, I am going to just put it right across the page in just a slow, spattered motion. I'm not going to do the sky ahead of time. I don't mind that sky in the background is white. We can always fill that in later if we think that it needs a bit more color. But for now, we're just going to leave that. So I've spattered, and it's just kind of sitting there. I'm going to go in and pick up some of the ultramarine blue. It's going to be quite bright, but we can add green to those specks afterwards. And I'm just going to touch. Yes, it's moving quite nicely. Just going to touch in It's a little bit brighter than what I'm used to, but I think that's kind of a pretty looking tree, and just back and forth. It's not a perfect photographic rendition of a tree, but you know that that's a tree. And then we'll move over here. I can see some nice droplets, and there's spaces between the droplets where there's nothing happening. That's great. I love that these droplets are carrying this ultramarine blue quite nicely. Oops, I dipped it in the Prussian blue there, so we're going to get a little bit of a deeper tone, and that's fine. We can add a little bit of the Prussian to one side there and make it a little bit shadowy looking, perhaps. Yeah, I kind of like that. That Prussian blue is really quite gorgeous, and we can dab that in here and there, just in the other tree as well. And I love that the white kind of shows through. You know, maybe this will be a wintry vignette. You know, a little bit of white coming through, some snow happening perhaps. Don't be afraid to use the side of your brush. You know, it can give you some great texture, and help you move those pigments around. So there's some beautiful trees. The ultramarine in these Meiliang Paul Rubens paints is really quite lovely. I want to go in with a bit of green, and I think I'm going to try the Hooker's green, and just because the ultramarine is quite lovely and bright, and just here and there we'll add a bit of the Hooker's green. The paint drops are starting to dry a little bit, so that's going to change how things look, and the Hooker's green was that one right there. And let's see how that, and it does play nicely with the water as well. It's I love that these paints are quite thick. You can see where the paints on their own have followed up with some of that water, and they're creating other tree shapes in the background. It's one thing I love about landscapes is that they just, they're just there. There's a bit of magic, I think, that goes along with watercolor and landscapes that allow us to, yeah, I like this. They allow us, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. They allow us to have some play, and yeah, the Hooker's green is a brighter green than I typically would use, but hey, bright is nice. Using the side of my brush, I'm just going to bring a little bit of that green down, blending it with this blue, the ultramarine and the Prussian blue and the Hooker's green here at the bottom are really quite beautiful. That's giving me an idea, because we have these beautiful iridescence. There's 12 colors here that have a beautiful glitter iridescence to them. We might just incorporate that into this and make it a beautiful winter scene. I think that would be a fun thing to do. You can see here where the blue has sort of taken its own liberty with following the water down, and the droplets, and I think that is amazing. With the side of my brush, and I mean, I'm not loading my paint, I'm not scrubbing, the paint is woken up enough, I can just dip in, preserving my brush. Like I say, you don't want to be scrubbing away and destroying the surface of your brush. And your tip tips of the brushes are delicate, but a little bit of work with the side of the brush, laying that paint on the dry paper, and then you can go over afterwards with the side of the brush and just encourage a little bit more of that. And because this over here hasn't had the blue bleeding through, I'm going to just go back in, now that I've got my paint juicy and my page a little bit wet, and I'm going to just dab in, tap in, whoops, there's the Prussian, there's a little bit of the Prussian Blue for some shadows, because it's nice and dark. I want some shadows under my trees, so put a little bit of that in. But the Ultramarine Blue is missing sort of on this side. So I'm going to come in, I'm just adding a bit of water, dabbing it in there, and then I'm going to go in with my Ultramarine Blue and just with the tip of my brush put some little marks, and you can see how gorgeous that blue is as it migrates down through the hooker's green and the tree green that I have just sort of laid in there with the side of my brush. By adding little bits of water, little rivulets, little places for that pigment to follow, we get this incredible, it's just organic, and it's what creates the vignette effect. It's sort of a fading into nothingness that is, I find, so appealing with the vignette style. So I'm just adding a bit more of water randomly. You don't need to fill in your whole space, but just some places where the pigment, when we add it, and you can, working on a smaller piece and on a backing like this, you can pick it up and you can tip it. You can see where your water droplets are. There's nothing left in terms of droplets up above. They've all dried. I won't go back in and re-wet those with droplets because I love what's happening with these trees. If I was to spray again, any water that touches those existing tree shapes is going to change that, and they could turn into a big mushy pile. So I'm going to avoid that for now. I'm going to leave those, might go back in and fine tune a little bit later on, but now that I've got some water happening down here, I'm going to go back into that Ultramarine Blue and just add a tiny bit with sort of the tip, but on the side slightly with my brush. And if we're going to leave this as a winter scene, I'm not going to add any of the golds that I typically do. I think we're going to leave this pretty simply like this. I love that the white of the paper showing through looks like, I've got water on my face, looks like snow. Yeah, I think that's pretty gorgeous. I did wet my purples, and I hate seeing them sitting there doing nothing, so I'm going to add just a bit of purple. And if I look at my color swatch sheet, the violet red, it's a purple, but it's more on the red side and more on the I would say the warmer side. I don't really want that. It's not going to, for my eye, I don't see that fitting in with what I've got here. The fresh purple as well, I find it a bit on the pinky red side. So for this one, I'm going to go with the deep violet. And I think that would fit well with the colors that we have here already. So I'm just going to re-wet that slightly, let that sit for a moment, and let's see how this is going to play. think that it's, yeah, it's a good choice for this. It does beautifully with that blue, with both of the blues actually, with both the ultramarine and the Prussian blue. The purple is lovely. The purple and the green often tend to make brown, so we'll see how this ends up. But I like that the purple actually in this is keeping its own. I'm putting it over top of the green, and it's keeping its integrity, so to speak. I like that. And then on this side we have a lot of purple happening. So I want to see how the reverse works if I was to add some of the green to the purple. And we had some tree green. You've noticed I haven't used my paper towel yet this time, and I think I'm going to now, just to see if I can lift a little bit of that, see how staining it is. And let some of that run down. This has organically just feathered out into the water that was on the page, which is absolutely gorgeous. Some of that brighter green coming through, just to brighten things up a tiny bit. And we'll take, I like that there's white in there with a little bit of snowfall. Before I do anything else to my trees in terms of adding any pearlescent or shimmer or anything like that, I do want to test out on this paper and with this pigment how things can move with my little plastic tab as I go in and make some rock formations. So we're just going to move the paints. I like that they do move. They do like to hold their shape as I'm making the shapes. I can go back in. As long as your paint is pretty damp on your page, not dripping wet, not pooling so much, but dampish, you're going to be able to get in there and shape these rock formations quite nicely. You can pull, you can see where the pigments are pooling a little bit on the edges to help form the shadows on the edges of those rocks. And just with the side of my brush, I'm just going to catch the very edge of the color that's at the bottom and just encourage that a tiny bit to feather down. And then move this purple just, it's at a dryness level now where it's not pooling. It's still damp. I can see there's a bit of sheen to the paper. So the color is still movable. And that's where I like to go in and do a little bit of shaping. A lot of the paints will continue to move, some less than others. But as they dry, they will continue to to move, and oops, I dropped a drop of water on there. I'm going to just try something, going in with maybe the Prussian Blue this time, just because it's a bit darker. And I just want to follow along some of these little under parts of the rocks that were formed, just for a bit of shadow. And then touching with the side of my brush just to bring that shadow down into that whatever it happens to be at the bottom of your vignette. It's your painting. You can call it whatever you like. You know, perhaps it's a lake, a shimmery meadow. The snow has melted down here and just a bit wet and glistening. But there's that. The paint has continued to move here. The purple and the green has moved up slightly. I'm so excited about these paints. They're quite lovely. Now the green that I put in here was the hooker's green and the tree green. I can go in with just the tip of my brush, the tiniest bit of paint, and make stems if I want, branches, trunks, a little more definition. If I decide that tree in the background isn't attached to this part here, which kind of makes more sense to me, I'm just going to go back in and make that back into a little bush. A little dab with the towel. I do like how these paints will lift, and that's important. Often it's what you take away rather than what you put down that really enhances your painting. And just by pulling a little bit here and there, adding a bit of lightness, it gives you more dimension. And I find that this little rock here feels to me like it's not, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it fits in the right spot. So I'm going to add a bit more of the hooker's green there. And yeah, pull those rocks over a tiny bit. There we go. Put some shadows at the top. If I was going to add some of the interference colors, the interference green is here. I'm going to just see what that would look like if I added it just to a couple of the top edges of those boughs that stick out. And that's going to give me just a bit of interesting shimmer. I'm putting this on wet on dry because it's dry, and I don't want to add more water there. Oops. If I was to put this in here, for example, where it's still a bit wet, let's have a look and see where we go with that. I love that. So that would be, I don't know, I think I would just sort of add that, you know, considering that this is a winter scene, I would add some of the interference blue and the interference green just here and there. Just so you get the idea. Maybe the interference blue quite wet on the edge of this tree. And maybe a little bit coming down in here to enhance some of these shadowy snowbanks, and a tiny bit just on the top of some of those branches there for a bit of shimmer. Okay, I think the other color that we have in that line of colors that we've been using is the flash purple, they call it, and it's got a bit of glimmer to it, and it's a grayish purple. So what I want to do is just maybe enhance the bottom of those rocky areas there with just a little bit of the purple, and this is a bit stark. I will take, I think, I'm going to try the pearl, the flashing pearl. It's a hard one. I'm not sure. I think because whites and pearls are really not all that conducive to wetting. But I've got enough on my brush I can actually see it this time, and I'm just going to, because the colors here are going to move, I'm just taking that pearl and I'm just pulling very gently, barely touching the surface, and just pulling those colors through that splotched white area. And I'm going to do that up here a tiny bit as well. Just dabbing out a little bit of the water that's pooling. And just for the sake of testing these out, let's try and see what happens when we try to make rocks out of the iridescent pieces. Yeah. I think these little paints have great potential for a vignette. I would like to spend a bit more time exploring the possibilities. I just want to make this a little more uneven at the bottom here, because I like that in a vignette. I like that there's unevenness. Okay. So yes, the student set, 48 colors of the Meiliang Paul Rubens set. I think they would work just great, especially for beginner watercolorists. You know, just getting into watercolor, maybe can't afford the more expensive tube paints, the finer quality artist grade paints. This would be a good way to start. Some student grade paints don't have the pigmentation, they don't have the richness, they don't have the color, and the pigments don't have the movement that these paints seem to allow. So I think if I was asked, I would definitely recommend these. And for more experienced painters, they can really be a fun addition to your studio, especially if you're traveling. And if you're a tube painter like me, it's not always convenient to take a whole bunch of tubes or larger palettes. And going to different places, you know, typically, like I say, my colors aren't these oranges and reds and the pinks and things, but there are places in the world that I may end up where I'll want those colors to express what I'm seeing. So yeah, I'd be happy with continuing on some projects with these paints. So if you decide to use them, happy painting. I'd like to thank the Process Art Discovery audience for joining me today. If you like what you've seen, please subscribe to the channel.